All right, shoot.
Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whose children is his inheritance.
Very good, Miss Linda. She's on the spot with that one. Psalm 144, verse number 15. Anybody got that one? 144:15. We're sort of looking at this, the last phrase of it there, and we can get over there real quick. We'll read it. Psalm 144, verse 15. Happy is that people that is in such a case. Yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord. So that's just a little scripture with scripture comparison right there between Psalm 33, verse number 12, Psalm 144, verse number 15. Happy is that people whose God is the Lord. And what a wonderful truth that is, right? Blessed is the nation. So they'll be happy whose God is the Lord. And let me, as we hasten forward, of course, we appreciate everybody's messed up tonight because it's Tuesday and we feel like it's Wednesday. And Elliot said she had the baby on Monday, and I'm wanting to correct them. And she did have the baby on Monday, and I thought it was Tuesday. But today's Tuesday. And so tomorrow you're going to be all messed up. We're creatures of habit, aren't we? Tomorrow night, I'll get ready for church probably, because that's just naturally what my body does. You know, you do something long enough and it just sort of becomes natural, right? It becomes habit. And nothing wrong with that. Feeling like you ought to be in church. But we'll pray that you'll enjoy a little bit of downtime tomorrow. I know there's a lot of preparation that goes in. If you're having people over, if you're going somewhere, I guess you'll be able to just to have the night off. But a lot of preparation goes into Thanksgiving, and I don't think there's anything wrong with us meeting a day early. Amen? And I'm glad that the prayer service tonight, not by design, but by divine ordinance, was Thanksgiving. We heard about a baby being born. We prayed about that, and all is well, or thus far, and Brother Simon doing well. All the reports I've had have been good, and so that's a good praise report. We heard about a kidney that was a match. That's a praise report. We heard about some children that are now adopted after 2.5 years of prayer. That's a praise report. Listen, we couldn't have set those things up like that. We hear about Brother Dylan now eating regular food, going to get transferred. And not out of the woods, but in a much better position than last Wednesday. That's a praise report. That's 5 right there. And so we offset, you know, that Grandma's not feeling well, and Miss Georgia's not feeling well, and there's those things going on. But we offset that with some good Thanksgiving. And so thank the Lord for that. You've got a lot to be thankful for. We challenged you on Sunday to take some time this week, not ask the Lord for anything. I know that might have been difficult. There's a lot of things going on. But I think you ought to set aside some time and just thank the Lord for whatever. I mean, just for whatever. And think about all the things that you have to be thankful for, and just sort of start and rehearse those if you have a prayer list, or maybe you have answers to prayer or other things. But just spend some time in thanking the Lord. Don't wait till Thanksgiving. You can do it before that, right? And thank the Lord. And we should be a thankful people, especially that we're Christians. And then beyond that, we're Americans. And beyond that, we're not just in the Americas, but we're in the United States of America. Amen? And so, what's that? And our name is written down. And there's a whole heap right there, right? And so you could be in South America, and it wouldn't be as good. And you could be in Central America, and it wouldn't be as good. But you're here in North America, and not just any North America, but the United States, where we have freedom, right? You could be in Canada. That's, part of North America. And guess what? Not the freedoms that you and I have do they have over there, believe it or not. And so we have a lot to be thankful for. We ought to be thankful for all those things, all right? And be thankful one for another. And maybe you tell somebody that you're thankful. Write them a card. Go see them. And Brother Simon surely would not be opposed to a visit or, any number of things, just letting them know that you're thinking about him. I am so against being outdone by the world. And I heard of all the things that his job had done for him. And inside, I was so thankful. His job has providing Thanksgiving dinner. Many of his coworkers have come by and visited him in the hospital. They bought him flowers. They're making sure that his property is taken care of. That's his job. I'm saying that's his work people. And I said, but where is church people? What are we doing? Think about that for a minute. I refuse to be outdone at Calvary Baptist Church by some worldly work. Sorry. I know there's not many of us. There's not many at his work either. I'm not admonishing. I'm not yelling at you. I'm saying that the church should never be outdone by the world. We should never be outdone by the world when it comes to one of ours. He's more ours than he is theirs. They do that because he works and labors for them. But the fact of the matter is that unless they're saved, they're not going to spend an eternity with him. We are. And what a great testimony. On the flip side, what a great testimony to Brother Sinan, right? Is that he means that much to that place where he labors, that they would go out of the way to want to be a blessing to him. Listen, his boss bought him a laptop last week because he wanted to do his work and he didn't have any way to get there, and his boss said, I'll buy you a laptop so that you're able to do that. Not doing that so that he would do the work, but and told him on no uncertain terms, he's probably watching tonight, and told him on no uncertain terms, your paychecks, they're going to keep coming. I don't want you to even worry about that. Man, not bad for the world. And so don't ever let us be outdone by anyone in the world, all right? I think we ought to do more. And so we're taking them Thanksgiving dinner times 2. You're buying them prime rib. Forget turkey. Turkey, that's for saps, all right? And so Brother Jack said he'd buy him prime rib. Brother Chris said he'd buy him filet mignon.
Brother Jeff said he'd pay his mortgage.
Brother Jeff said he'd pay. I hope he's watching. Brother Jeff said he'd pay your mortgage for a year. Let your boss do that. Don't worry, Miss Barb. Miss Barb said she'd buy you a car so that you could more comfortably get in and out of it through this difficult time. She said she'll give you your Ford Explorer. What she won't tell you is it's broke down in the shop, but you can have it. It's being repaired, and you can have the bill, too. So if you're watching, Brother Sinan, this is what your church is doing for you. And we won't be outdone by your job. As a matter of fact, you don't need them to shovel the snow, because Brother Joe, who's working in the sound booth, and we appreciate Brother Joe working in the sound booth, he said he was going to buy you a four-wheel drive truck with a plow on it. And he would come over and run it for you. All right, there we go. We'll not be outdone. We'll not be outdone. What's that?
You just have to come to church to get it all.
Yeah, you are going to have to come to church on Sunday, though, to get it all. There's always a caveat, right? But let's be prayerful and mindful about those. We are a family, and so we have to help one another. You know, somebody might need your help this Thanksgiving. We do things at Thanksgiving. We try to, take care of families if we can or whatever, and everybody's got a lot of things going on. And you know what? If you know somebody that needs some help, ready? This will shock you. Go and buy them a Thanksgiving dinner. Like you, go buy them a Thanksgiving dinner. It'll be a blessing to them. You say, that's expensive. I'll have to cook it. It'll be all right. That'll be a blessing, won't it? And so you can't do any of those Kroger order them. They're all out. Tried that, all right? And no. But, just be a blessing to them. You can be a blessing to someone. And if you know someone in need, just be a blessing to them. And so that's a great way to show thanksgiving, all right? And so, but thank the Lord for all of those wonderful things that are taking place, and the Lord is just working. All right? The flight to Holland. The pilgrims, these settlers, this church as we know it, the Scrooby congregation has left their homes and left everything behind, and they have gone to Holland. And so they're going to spend, and we sort of left there, and I told you that there were some reasons after being there for 12 years that they felt that they needed to leave, and I want to just go back over a little bit, not of the reasons, but there's some other reasoning behind that I want to share with you. The number of people in Holland at this point, all right, in 1619, 1620, about 1620, obviously is when they came this direction. There are about 400 to 500 of them. They went over at about 120, and now there's 400 to 500 of them. It is said about them that they work 12 to 15 hours a day, and this is called the Leiden congregation. They're literally just a church, and they're living in Holland. But I'll quote William Bradford again, and he said, "But that which was more lamentable and of all sorrows most heavy to be borne was that many of their children by these occasions and the great licentiousness of the youth in that country and the manifold temptations of the place were drawn away by evil examples into extravagant and dangerous courses, getting the reins off their necks and departing from their parents." All right? So they were losing their young people to the young people in Holland. They were being drawn out of the congregation, away from the church, and lured by the world. All right? And then another problem that I didn't share with you was that the 12-year treaty between Spain and the Netherlands was going to end in 1621, all right? So we're about 1620, 1619, 1620, and over half of Leiden's 100,000 inhabitants had succumbed to disease and starvation in the last siege between these two countries that took place, in 1574. And so that's kind of a negative, right? The treaty's about to end, and they're afraid they're going to be at war again or be not cohabitating very well. And if 100,000 of them had starved to death, how many of these pilgrims would have gotten caught up in that? Because remember, they're not even part of Holland. They're strangers, so they're going to be the last of the last to be taken care of. So now they've got that going against them again. Let me, if I can, just quote Mr. Bradford. "A great hope and inward zeal they had of laying some good foundation, or at least to make some way thereunto. For," listen to this. This is his words about them leaving Holland. "For the propagating and advancing the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world. Yea, though they should be but even as stepping stones unto others for the performing of so great a work." Can you even, that was their thinking, is that we've got to get out of Holland. I mean, we've got several reasons, but a good reason for us to leave here is so that we may go into the world and give the gospel to others. What a church. This is what they're thinking of. They want to be missionaries, all right? And listen, you don't have to believe me. Those are William Bradford's words himself in talking about this congregation, all right? And their leaving of Holland, okay? And so there's a lot that would have to take place. A lot of undertaking would have to take place. And again, Bradford, he quotes, or I quote Bradford, "It was all answered, that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties and must be both enterprised and overcome with answerable courages. It was granted the dangers were great, but not desperate. The difficulties were many, but not invincible. For though there were many of them likely, yet they were not certain. It might be sundry of the things feared might never befall. Others by provident care and the use of good means might in good measure be prevented. And all of them through the help of God by fortitude and patience might either be borne or overcome." Remember, they're thinking about the new world. And did you get what he said? He said, hey, some of the problems we're afraid of may never come. And the ones that do come, we'll be able to overcome some of those. And the rest of them, God will take care of them for us. Why should we sit here? We might as well strike out and do something for God. Well, that'd be good for you and I just to put into our lives, wouldn't it? We fret and worry about all these things. And most of them will probably not come to pass. And some of those things that will come to pass, you know what? We'll be able to take care of them. And I mean, just from providence, providence and just from God taking care of us. And whether it's a money issue, God will give us the money. But the fact is that God will help us with all of the problems. That's what he was saying. And so we might as well just endeavor. And so they settled the question to leave the Netherlands. And now they have to figure out where they want to go. I told you on Sunday that they had thought about two places. Number one was Guyana. The other is Virginia. All right? And they talked about it and deliberated about it for quite a time. And they thought that if they went to Guyana, while it would be a great place with warmer conditions and so on and so forth, they thought the combined threat of tropical diseases and the lurking Spaniards made the Indian-infested coast of northern Virginia the lesser of two evils. They would only have to deal with the Indians if they came to Virginia, but they'd have to deal with disease and the Spaniards, and they knew about the Spaniards. They were a bunch of murderers, and they wanted to stay away from that. And so they have limited resources. Because of where they live, they don't have money. And so they hire or they send two of their own to England to procure the patent from the Virginia Company to allow them to come to the Americas. You had to get a patent to do that, all right? And so they sent Robert Cushman and John Carver, and they would have to underwrite the cost. They would have to set up the contract. So they sent two from the congregation back to England to get the contract all written up, all right? The pastor and his assistant, it was signed by the pastor, but they sent a letter with these two fellows, and I want to read to you the 5 things they put in the letter because they're very, very important, especially the 5th one, as it will come into play when they come to the new country. And so Pastor John Robinson, who's the pastor of the congregation, would sign the letter, and his assistant, William Brewster, who we'll see will come out more in their travels than the pastor. And so he listed, there's a 5-point outline, and it highlighted the strengths and convictions of the applicants. So you understand what's going on here? They're making an application. And you know, sometimes on an application, you got to sell yourself to those that you're applying to. So they wrote 5 things out to sell themselves to the Virginia Company, to get the Virginia Company to finance their expedition and issue them a patent to come to Virginia, to come to the Americas and establish a colony. Here's the 5 things, and I'll in order. We verily believe, number 1, we verily believe and trust the Lord is with us, unto whom and whose service we have given ourselves in many trials, and that he will graciously prosper our endeavors according to the simplicity of our hearts therein. Number 2, we are, listen to these things, and think of, you got to understand the writing here, but think about the wording. We are well weaned from the delicate milk of our mother country and inured to the difficulties of a strange and hard land, which yet in a great part we have by patience overcome. We're not a bunch of babies. That's what he said. We've endured trials and problems. We're pretty sure we can handle this. Number 3, the people are, for the body of them, industrious and frugal. We think we may safely say, as any company of people in the world. Number 4, we are knit together as a body in a most strict and sacred bond and covenant of the Lord, of the violation whereof we make great conscience, and by virtue whereof we do hold ourselves straitly tied to all care of each other's good, as of the whole, by every one, and so mutually. I just talked about that before I got into teaching tonight. Isn't that wonderful? He said, we know how the new world will be able to make it. That's a wonderful testament to the way that a church ought to be structured. But it's number 5 where it's important. I want you to key in on a phrase that comes after the very first word. There's a little phrase in here. Listen to this phrase. Lastly, it is not with us as with other men. What a phrase. Whom small things can discourage, and small discontentments cause to wish themselves at home again. We know our entertainment in England and in Holland. we shall much prejudice both our arts and means by removal, who if we should be driven to return, we should not hope to recover our present helps and comforts, neither indeed look for ever for ourselves to attain unto the like in any other place during our lives which are not drawn towards this period. What a profound statement. We're not as other men. We know what we're leaving behind. We know what England offers. We know what Holland has offered. And we know not what lies ahead, but we're not as other men. We'll not be drawn back. And if we do come back to England, and we understand we'll come back with nothing. Can you imagine such a thought when you would set out and endeavor to do something? Boy, do we need more people like this in society. We need more people like this in the church. We need to be not as other men. Why? We need to be like these men. These were men and women who trusted in God and the providence of God and said, we can leave behind the world and we can leave behind everything because God has a greater purpose for us. This is the foundation of our country. This is why America is a great nation still. We're losing this foundation, though, because we don't have it is not with us as other men. I don't know how, Brother Short, I don't know how we get back to this place. I preach about it all the time. And I'm not saying I'm one of these men. I'm not saying I don't know how I would face these things. And all the time I'm saying we need more men and women who would be like this. And it feels like I just beat my head against the wall. And I know other people feel that way. I don't know how we get back to this place, but would to God we'd get back to this place. And have some people that would not be like other men. And say, come what may, I am going to press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling. It doesn't matter. I can leave the world behind. I can leave earthly pleasures behind. I can leave it all behind to serve God. What a wonderful thing. The Virginia Company was impressed. Although John Robinson would have led his entire flock to America, only about a third of the membership possessed the constitution for such a journey. And because the weaker faction comprised the majority, the pastor himself would not even go across to America. He stayed with the older congregation. William Brewster, his assistant, would be the body. He was the body or the church's teaching elder, William Brewster. And so I'll call myself the pastor. And so the older congregation said, well, we can't go. I would stay behind. We'll call Brother Jeff the teaching elder. He would teach in the church and do a lot of things and help the pastor. It was a big congregation. 500's a big congregation now. That was a big congregation. And so William Brewster took the charge and said, I'll take the people, pastor. You stay with the people. And listen, they all expected to maybe come over at one time, but the fact of the matter is they didn't know. And so Mr. Brewster was the one who would provide the leadership for this historic endeavor. Now, while Mr. Cushman was in London negotiating with Captain Jones, the owner of the Mayflower, a smaller and a second vessel was purchased in Holland, and that was the Speedwell. It was smaller, it was a faster boat, and this was going to help provide some new things for the new colony. So while the Mayflower would take them, the Speedwell would stay with them in the Americas here, and they would be able to use that ship and travel, and if they needed to, remember this, watch this, if they needed to, the Mayflower was intended to leave them and come back. That's all that it was hired to do, take them there and come back. All right? Then they would have the Speedwell. Hey, if things went bad, they'd be able to come back. But they would be able to use this ship as they were there. All right? So they fitted it out. They would be able to use it for fishing and all kinds of things while they were here after they got here. All right? And so when all's ready, a special day of prayer and fasting takes place. And Bradford writes again, so being ready to depart, they had a solemn day of humiliation. Their pastor taking his text from Ezra, and he quotes, and there at the river by Ahava I proclaimed a fast, that we might humble ourselves before our God, and seek of him a right way for us, and for all our children, and for all our substance. That's in the book of Ezra. chapter number 8, verse number 21, I think. No, Roman numerals, you got to know how to read Roman numerals when you read old stuff. And I'm pretty sure it's chapter number 8. Upon which he spent a good part of the day very profitably and suitable to their present condition. The rest of the time we spent in pouring out our prayers to the Lord with great fervency, mixed with abundance of tears. So that basically he preached a good long part of the day, and then they prayed the rest of the day. All right? And so in order to lend his assistance in the needed area of leadership, ready for this? William Bradford, who's going to become first governor, he's going to leave his 5-year-old son John in Holland to make this journey. Could you imagine leaving your 5-year-old son behind to strike out on this journey? All right? Many others would leave their children behind to do this, okay? And so here again, I quote Bradford, so they left that goodly and pleasant city, which had been their resting place near 12 years. But they knew they were pilgrims, and looked not much on those things, but lift up their eyes to the heavens, their dearest country, and quieted their spirits. And so they would go. When they arrive in England, all right, you have to understand, now they arrive in England, right? They're getting their patent to come to America. When they arrive in England, they're informed by their sponsor, who was an unscrupulous agent. He was sort of the go-between with the Virginia Company and those that were there. His name was Thomas Weston, that a glitch in their original contract required an additional payment of £30 for them to get the contract, to get the patent. The Pilgrims decided, as many say unwisely, to allow Weston and a group of London capitalists, because that's what they were, to represent them with the Virginia Company. They probably shouldn't have done that, but they allowed these capitalists to represent them as opposed to representing themselves, all right? So they sort of had some help, right? Some people that knew the Virginia Company. And these are the fellas that said to them, it's going to cost you 30 more pounds than we originally thought. Now listen, the church hasn't talked with the Virginia Company. They're trusting what these men say. You can imagine they're probably taking advantage of them, okay? Just like they would nowadays to every Christian that they could possibly take advantage of, all right? And so they went ahead and went for that, and to get that extra 30 pounds, they had to sell several thousand pounds of butter to settle that debt. Butter that they were planning on taking with them. All right? And so an even greater concern to these sensitive passengers, especially to the family heads, was with regard to the confining quarters they would be sharing with their less than spiritual fellow travelers. That would be those that are, on the ship. And so that's Captain Jones and all of his crew, all right? The Mayflower interior was smaller than a tennis court. They have 3 decks on the Mayflower. You have top deck, all right? And I looked it up and all the measurements and all that. And the captain would have his quarters sort of at the back of the ship, up top on the very back. The crew quarters would be below him. And then you would have the decks of the ship, which would be a very busy place, all right? Front to back, stem to stern, I guess, however they would say that. It was about a 100-foot boat. The deck was about 80 feet. Give or take a little bit, all right? It's a big boat. And so you'd have deck, that's the upper deck. You have the middle deck, that's the gun deck. Exactly what it is. That's where they kept the guns for protection, all right? That was somewhat about 36 wide, okay? And that's what a tennis court is. Now, the boat itself might have been a little bit wider, but that deck was about 36 wide, all right? So it's below the other deck. And it's about 75 to 80 feet long, but 12, give or take about 12 foot of that on the back of the boat is where all the gunpowder is, and nobody's allowed in that room. So you have to take that off of the measurement. You've got an area, and by the way, the sides of the boat and everything else, some have estimated that they have about, let's just say about 30 by 70 to live in. All the passengers that are going to go over on the Mayflower, except for the crew, are living in a 30 by 70 space in between 2 decks. The bottom deck, all right, is going to be for storage and for things that they're taking with them. This auditorium is a little wider than 30 feet. All right, a little bit wider, not much, a little wider than 30 feet. Might be like 35 or something like that. There was 3 runs of carpet in here, and they were 12 foot each. And so it's a little wider than 30 feet. And the building itself is fairly long, but I just would say that probably from that wall to the doors and about this wide, you're going to have all of these passengers live in their journey over. Live. Families. You guys spread around this auditorium like you're on a cruise ship every service. And there ain't as many of us as is going to be living on this deck, all right? Can you even imagine that? They also say, and I don't know this to be the case, but they say ceiling height was about 5.5 feet. Now that'd be some pretty close quarters. Now I didn't really confirm that. It doesn't really matter. It was small, all right? They set sail. August 5, 1620. Finally did it. They got everything they needed. They finally set sail. But they experienced a serious problem after 3 days at sea. The speedwell is taking on water so bad that they can't get it under control. And so they are forced to return to the nearby port of Dartmouth. They spend a week there recalking the speedwell. So now they've got 3 days, they've got a week, and they've had time loading this. Listen, a lot of time has passed, all right? They depart again, and again, the same mysterious leaks on the speedwell. They can't even keep up with the pumping to keep the water out of the speedwell, and they fear that if they continue the journey, the speedwell will sink. And then what will happen? So they decide to send the speedwell back home because it is pronounced unseaworthy. Now there's passengers on the speedwell. All right, pilgrims. And there's pilgrims here, okay? Things are not looking too good, but you know what? I think God knows what he's doing. And remember, the butter the butter that they've now sold was sort of the surplus food that they had. And so they've now lost that. They've now lost the commercial shipping vessel they were going to take with them, and their only lifeline to England should emergency arise. And you know what? Apparently they were going to have to live by the motto that was emblazoned across the sails of the Mayflower. Anybody know what the sail of the Mayflower said on it? Just pull out your money and look at it. In God we trust. Isn't that interesting? So the speedwell is sent back, but in doing so, they had to send back some of the company of people because not all of them could get onto the Mayflower. So they deemed those the weakest, and some that were timid and still afraid of the sailing to go back on the speedwell. They limp it back to London. By the way, I was reading up on that, and the matter of fact that speedwell would get back to London and would be used in service for many, many years after it got back to London and never leak. There's 2 schools of thought. Number one, God was doing that to remove from them all their thoughts of coming back, because he wanted them to strike out because they were not as other men. That's number one. Number two, it is said that the captain was paid off and that he had the rigging of the ship tied too tight and was causing it to leak because he really didn't want to make the journey. All right? Either way, it sounded like God was at work in that thing, okay? And so they come back, and on September 6th, now, 1620, so, you know, you've got almost a month that they've been on this ship. Right? They've been on it already for a month. On September 6, 1620, the Mayflower embarked on her epic voyage. 102 people on board the Mayflower. 41 separatists and 61 other people. And now they are, many of them crammed into that small space. Interesting, Captain Jones used that ship to haul wine and cognac for France. It was nicknamed the Sweet Ship because of the smell. When he would haul all those barrels of whiskey below deck, it smelled like sweet liquor. And so they called it the Sweet Ship. That was the only thing he would use that boat for, except for, in this case, that they had hired him to do that, all right? 45 days of disrupted travel are now behind them. And the pilgrims are going to endure 65 more days in this gun deck. Now listen, for 9 weeks, They toss and turn. They are kept below deck. Now, they say early on in the sailing, they were able to come up and get fresh air and so on and so forth. Oh, sometime through the journey, a couple of weeks into the journey, they met, because we've got to remember, just like the Bible would say, Paul said when sailing was now past, all right, they're sailing this direction, and you have to remember, we're talking about nor'easters and all this other stuff. Look what's going on in the East Coast like now. All them storms, that's what they're sailing into. They're sailing into hurricane season. They're sailing into all those nor'easters and all that. That's when they're sailing. So about a couple weeks into the journey, give or take, they are going to meet those formidable waves on this ship. The captain sequesters them all onto that deck and batten down the hatches because they put covers over them so the water doesn't get down there and sink the ship. They're stuck in those quarters for the rest of that trip, all right? They say there was choking ventilation. What are you going to open to let air out, okay? No one could bathe or change their clothes for the entire trip. That'd be pretty rough, wouldn't it? How about the food situation? They couldn't light fires. It would choke them out. So everyone ate their rations cold. The biscuits, they would smash into pieces with chisels and then eat them. The cheese was moldy, and whatever creepy things were on the boat creeping and crawling around were going through their peas and their grain. All right? And on board are two expectant mothers. Can you even imagine that? They said they made themselves like little booths almost on that deck of that ship, and they kind of lived in their own areas. But I mean, can you imagine all of them? Could you imagine that many people jammed into this with the seas raging over us, and you're getting tossed and turned, and people are getting sick because they're not used to the sea doing this? This isn't a cruise ship. Man, this thing's all over the place. And it's going through the breakers, all right? And it's a sailboat, so it's listing one way and the other, all right? Throughout the early weeks of sailing, the pilgrims would endure continuous verbal harassment from the crew to add insult to injury. One man distinguished himself as sort of a self-appointed tormentor, they say, and he delighted in calling the pilgrims psalm-singing puke stockings, and said, prophetically speaking, that he would tell them, I'll soon be feeding you to the fish. Now let's hear what Bradford had to say about that. But it pleased God, before they came half seas over, to smite this young man with a grievous disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and so was himself the first to be thrown overboard. Thus his curses light on his own head, and it was an astonishment to all his fellows, for they noted it to be the just hand of God upon him. First guy to get fed to the fishes. Don't mess with God's people. Case in point right there. When God is in something, don't mess with it. All right? And so on a different occasion, a young man could no longer endure cabin fever. He climbed out onto the sea swamp deck. I mean, man, they're tossing and turning. He said, I can't take it anymore. He goes up onto the deck. He gets washed overboard. And immediately they scream, man, overboard. But listen, out of nowhere, there's a line that is dragging behind the ship that I was reading. Mr. Bradford said he was a couple of fathoms down already. And that ship was dragging in, that rope, was dragging in the water, and he reached out and he grabbed hold of that rope, and those men knew that he had grabbed hold of that rope, and they began to pull him in, and they pulled him back aboard. They said, William Bradford said the only thing that really happened to him was that he was sick for a couple days after the freezing cold waters. They thought when he went into the water he'd never come out. It was freezing cold waters. But that was one of them, and God was sparing him. And again, you would see Steve and Elizabeth Hopkins through all of that. How about this? How about all of you sitting in the hospital room when Miss Jill gives birth? She had her baby on board and gave birth to a very healthy and happy young man whom they named Oceanus. And so interesting name. And at daybreak on November the 9th, Someone cried, land ho. And it was the northern coast of Virginia. It was not the northern coast of Virginia, right? But now they're on the highlands of Cape Cod. Having arrived a great distance north of where they intended to put ashore, gave them a vicarious appreciation of Hebrews 11:8, went out knowing not whither they were going, right? That's what happened to Abraham. And now they're far from where they needed to be, all right? And again, Mr. Bradford will give us some insight. Being thus arrived in good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean and delivered them from all their perils and miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth, their proper element. But listen to these words again when we think about where do we put ashore? What's beyond the trees, right? The East Coast wasn't what it is now with harbors and all this other. It's this ominous thing, right? How much time did they have before winter would come? By the way, winter is really on its way. It's there. It's this time of year, all right? And they're in violation of their patent. You're not supposed to do, that's a violation, all right? And that could go very badly for them. Again, can I quote Mr. Bradford? But here I cannot but stay and make a pause and stand half amazed at this poor people's present condition. And so I think will the reader too, when he well considers the same. Being thus past the vast ocean and a sea of troubles before in their preparation, they had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain, or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses, or much less town to repair to seek for succor. It is recorded in Scripture as a mercy to the apostle and his shipwrecked company. He's talking about Acts chapter number 28, right? But these savage barbarians, when they met with them, after all will appear, were readier to fill their sides full of arrows than otherwise. He's saying, he said, I'm going to talk about that, which will appear. He said, I'll talk about that later, how we were met by the savages. He said, but we know them savages only want to kill us. It's not what the Apostle Paul went when the barbarians met them and made them a fire. He said, we're not getting that same thing. And for the season, it was winter. And they that know the winters of that country know them to be a sharp and violent and subject to cruel and fierce storms, dangerous to travel to known places, much more to search an unknown coast. Besides, what could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness full of wild beasts and wild men, and what multitudes there might be of them they knew not. One more quote, and I'll wind down for the night, and you'll have to come back. I'm going to give to you the Mayflower Compact, one of the most important documents in all of history, probably next to your Bible, is the Mayflower Compact, especially on the foundations of America, because nothing like the Mayflower Compact ever in history, including in the Bible, had ever taken place on what those men did that day. Think about that for a minute. We're in 1620. Mankind's been around for a long time by 1620, and no one has ever taken up to write a compact like they wrote the Mayflower Compact, which was the forerunner and the forefather to the Constitution of these United States of America. But again, we think about these that are not as other men, right? And he writes, what could now sustain them but the Spirit of God and His grace? May not and ought not the children of these fathers rightly say, our fathers were Englishmen, which came over this great ocean and were ready to perish in the wilderness, but they cried unto the Lord, and He heard their voice and looked on their adversity, etc. Let them therefore praise the Lord because He is good, and His mercies endure forever. That was what he wrote on the backside of being in a country, being in a place where there's no hotel. There's no place to take ship in and fix it. There's no house to warm and welcome you. And now it's winter. I wouldn't want to be anywhere in the winter, much less on a ship in waters that I'd never been to on the East Coast. Yeah, I mean, you know what's going on. If you watch the weather for the East Coast, this is the same time of year. It's November. All right? So it's not good. And And on Sunday morning, I will share with you the Mayflower Compact. And then the story gets really exciting. There's not a lot to go, but the story gets exciting as they'll begin to explore this great land on Cape Cod. But come on Sunday and let me talk about the Mayflower. And then I will get to that first Thanksgiving. By the way, in advance of getting there, I'll tell you the first Thanksgiving did not take place in the first year that they were there, even though he said right here, we gave pause and gave thanks to God for getting us here. Sounds like Thanksgiving. They're going to have Thanksgiving the very next year in 1621 after spending some time here. But it's not going to come very easily, for there'll be much difficulty before they enjoy that first Thanksgiving. And you'll see through the Mayflower Compact, listen, they've lost a ship. They've lost supplies. But they've not lost the Spirit of God. They've lost their bearings, and instead of landing on a coast that would have been warm and welcoming, right, at that time of year, they have now landed in a completely different part of the world. They have no authority to be there. They have no patent, and they would be held in violation of the patent, and they could be heavily fined and taxed if they found out that they were somewhere else and were setting up in that point. Basically, what they're supposed to do is take to ship, and get to the point where they're supposed to be. And they're going to attempt that. They're going to attempt because they want to do right. And that's. But the Lord has other plans. The Lord knew where He wanted them, and you will see the absolute providential hand of God in setting up the land where they landed. In such a, it's biblical. It is of a biblical thing where they landed, and how God set it up for those pilgrims to land right there. I just believe the hand of God was in it. I believe the hand of God was in the whole thing. Why? Because blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And they really, truly desired to come here and to preach the gospel. They wanted religious freedom. You know what they wanted religious freedom to do? Preach the gospel and the truth of the Bible without someone telling them that they could not do that. That was real religious freedom. And they said, we're going to win these heathen. We don't care about gold. We don't care about anything. We care about God. And that is what they came here to do. And it's very unfortunate that they get dragged through the mud. And I mean, there's a old black and white movie. It was on the other night. Talk about the Mayflower. I don't even know what it's called. Oh man, I can't think of the guy. I think that's the name of the movie. I think it is the Mayflower, and I can't think of the guy's name that's in it. It's not Errol Flynn. I don't think Errol Flynn is in that one, but it is. There's several people of note that are in the movie, and it is just not anything of the truth. All right, it's just not anything of the truth, and it's pretty sad. But nonetheless, I guess it makes for good entertainment. But listen, and I like old black and white movies. I don't think they're all perfect, but I think they were doing some things right at least before they put all this filth out. But the fact of the matter is it was very interesting. I've watched some of it. I wouldn't waste my time, but it's interesting to say the least. The guy's name that's in the movie starts with an S. Spencer Tracy. Boom! There it is. Spencer Tracy plays Captain Jones, and he's just a real scumbag in the movie. But nonetheless, if you want to watch it, knock yourself out, I guess. All right. We live in a great nation. Let's thank the Lord for that. All right, Father, dismiss us with Thy blessing. Thank you for our forefathers, and thank you for our fathers, and thank you for those that are here tonight. Thank you for every good praise report we heard tonight. Lord, be with every prayer request that's been mentioned. Bless now everyone, Lord, whether they're here or not. Help them to have a wonderful Thanksgiving time with family and friends, and just enjoy it. Lord, just give us some enjoyment over the next couple of days as we spend time together. And we'll look forward to that, Lord, and being back together on Sunday. Now, dismiss us with Thy blessing in Jesus'